Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into Matthew chapter 14 today.
Oh, this is a good one. It's like a roller coaster.
It really is. We go from a pretty grim event to a miracle to,
Yeah.
well, let's just say things get pretty intense.
You've got political intrigue, a tragic execution, a massive feast, and then walking on water. It's hard to top that.
Definitely. So we start with the execution of John the Baptist, right? The guy who baptized Jesus.
Yeah, and it's important to remember John wasn't just some random preacher. He was a prophet, and people took him seriously.
Yeah.
But he was also, outspoken. He wasn't afraid to call people out, even powerful people like Herod.
Right, the ruler of Galilee. And what got John in trouble?
Well, he criticized Herod's marriage to Herodias. She was his brother's wife, and that was a big no-no according to Jewish law.
So John lands in prison. Not the best place to be.
No, definitely not. And unfortunately for John, it doesn't get any better. The story takes a pretty dark turn at Herod's birthday party. Can you imagine?
Oh, yeah. This is a birthday party no one forgets. Herod throws this big feast. There's music, dancing.
And Herodias' daughter performs the dance. Herod's so impressed, he promises her anything she wants. Classic power move.
Except, well, the daughter's been influenced by her mother, who, let's just say, wasn't a big fan of John.
He wanted revenge. So what does she ask for? John the Baptist's head. On a platter.
Talk about holding a grudge. And Herod, he actually goes through with it.
He's hesitant at first, but yeah, he was more worried about looking bad in front of his guests than doing what was right. I guess that's what power can do to you.
Makes you think, doesn't it? Anyway, this tragic event definitely sets a somber mood, but then Matthew shifts gears pretty quickly. We go from death to a scene of, well, abundance.
Yeah, the feeding of the 5,000. This is one of those stories that just blows people's minds.
It's incredible. Jesus hears about John's death, and he withdraws to a deserted place, probably to grieve and pray. But of course, the crowds follow him.
Thousands of them. And the disciples are, understandably, freaking out a little.
I mean, they're in the middle of nowhere, it's getting late, and there's no food. And what do they suggest? Send the people away.
Right. Go find food yourselves. We can't help you.
But Jesus, he's got a different plan. He tells the disciples, you feed them. Now, they only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish.
And that's supposed to feed thousands of people. It doesn't exactly add up.
Nope, not at all. But here comes the miracle. Jesus blesses the food, breaks it, and somehow it multiplies. Everyone eats their fill, and they even have leftovers.
12 baskets full of leftovers. I mean, come on. That's amazing. It really shows that with God, there's always enough.
It makes you think about how we approach scarcity, right? Are we focused on what we lack? Or do we trust that God can provide even when things seem impossible?
That's a great question. And it's not just about physical needs either. This story points to a deeper spiritual truth. Jesus as the bread of life, the source of true sustenance.
It's a message that goes way beyond just feeding people. But then the story takes another turn. Jesus sends the disciples across the Sea of Galilee in a boat while he stays behind to pray.
And as you can probably guess, things don't exactly go smoothly.
Nope. A storm kicks up.
Yeah.
We're talking high winds, rough waves, the whole 9 yards.
And the disciples, they're struggling. Imagine, right? You're out on this little boat. It's pitch black. The waves are tossing you around.
Terrifying. It's that feeling of being completely at the mercy of nature.
Yeah, and it also feels like a metaphor, doesn't it, for all the challenges we face in life, the storms that threaten to overwhelm us.
Absolutely. And then, just when things seem hopeless, they see a figure walking towards them on the water.
I can't even imagine what they must have thought. Was it a ghost? A hallucination? Some kind of sea monster?
It's Jesus, completely calm, walking on the waves like it's nothing.
And he says to them, "Take courage. It's me. Don't be afraid."
I love that. Such a powerful message. But then Peter, always the one to push things a little further.
He asks Jesus, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water." Classic Peter.
And unbelievably, Jesus says, come. And Peter actually does it. He steps out of the boat and starts walking towards Jesus. It's incredible.
Until he takes his eyes off Jesus.
Right? He looks at the wind, the waves, and he starts to sink.
It's a classic example of how doubt can creep in, even when we've experienced the miraculous.
It's so relatable, right? We all have those moments where fear takes over, even when we know we should trust in something bigger than ourselves.
And Peter cries out, "Lord, save me."
And Jesus immediately reaches out and pulls him up.
But then he asks Peter, "Why did you doubt?" It's a gentle rebuke, but also a reminder that even a little bit of doubt can disrupt our connection with God.
It's such a powerful lesson.
Yeah.
And then they get back in the boat, the wind dies down, and everything is calm.
Just like that. It's amazing. And the disciples, they finally get it. They worship Jesus, recognizing him as the Son of God.
After all that, they land in a region called Gennesaret. Word gets out that Jesus is there, and people come from all over, hoping for healing.
They believe that even touching the hem of his garment can heal them.
It speaks volumes about the level of faith they had, right? They were desperate for healing, for hope.
And I think the location is significant too. Gennesaret was known for its fertility. There's a connection there to the feeding of the 5,000 abundance, you know?
It's like a symbol of restoration and renewal.
And that's where we'll pick up in part 2. We've got a lot more to unpack in this chapter.
We definitely do. Stay tuned, everyone. Wow, so we left off with Jesus and the disciples landing in Gennesaret, right? And people are flocking to him, wanting to be healed.
Yeah, it's like the news spread like wildfire. Jesus is here. He can heal you. It's pretty remarkable.
What I find interesting is that people believe just touching his clothes, like the edge of his garment, can heal them.
He shows how desperate they were, you know? They were willing to try anything, and there was this belief that holy people, prophets, even their clothes had power.
It's a powerful testament to their faith, for sure. But, going back a bit, it's striking how this chapter starts with death, John the Baptist's execution, and ends with all this healing.
Oh, definitely. It's like this whole arc from darkness to light. And I think it mirrors what the disciples are going through emotionally, too.
Right. I mean, they're grieving John's death, then worried about feeding all those people, then terrified in that storm.
Talk about a roller coaster of emotions. But then they see Jesus walk on water, and it's like everything shifts.
It's like those ups and downs we all go through in our faith, right?
Yeah.
The doubts, the fears, those moments where you're not sure what to believe, but then something happens and it renews your faith.
And that whole scene with Peter walking on water, I mean, that's a powerful metaphor, isn't it?
Oh, totally. As long as he's focused on Jesus, he's fine. But when he looks at the storm, he starts to sink.
It's like that in life, right? When we focus on our problems, our fears, we lose sight of what's really important.
Absolutely. It's a reminder to keep our eyes on Jesus, even when things get rough.
You know, one thing that strikes me about Matthew 14 is that it's not just about these amazing miracles, it's also about the human side of the disciples.
Oh, for sure. They're not perfect. They make mistakes. They doubt. They're afraid.
Just like us. And I think that makes them even more relatable, don't you think?
Absolutely. It makes their faith journey feel more real, more accessible, because we all struggle with doubt, with fear, with trying to understand what God is doing.
Right. It's not about pretending to have it all figured out. It's about being honest with where we are, with our struggles.
And trusting that God can work through our imperfections.
Exactly. So when we look at all these events in Matthew 14, you know, the execution, the miracle of the loaves and fish, Jesus walking on water, what do you think we can learn from all this? How can we apply it to our own lives today?
Well, for me, it's a reminder that God can do the impossible. We see that over and over again in this chapter.
Yeah, and even when we face challenges that seem impossible, we can still trust in God. Like the disciples in that storm, we might feel like we're sinking, but God is always there to pull us up.
And I think it's important to remember, like we talked about earlier, that faith isn't just about believing. It's about acting on that belief.
Doing something, even when it's scary, even when we're not sure what the outcome will be.
Stepping out of the boat, so to speak.
Yeah.
And another thing that really stands out to me is the importance of speaking truth to power, even when it's difficult.
Oh, absolutely. Like John the Baptist. He knew the risks, but he spoke out against injustice anyway. And ultimately, he paid the price for it.
But his courage, his willingness to stand up for what's right, is inspiring. It challenges us to do the same, even when it's hard, even when it's unpopular.
You know, we often talk about individual faith, but I think it's interesting to look at the collective faith in this chapter as well.
You mean like those crowds who came to Jesus for healing?
Yeah, and even the disciples. They were a community of faith, supporting each other through these challenging times.
It's a reminder that we're not meant to go through this alone. We need each other. We need that support, that encouragement.
Right, because we're all part of this bigger story. And sometimes we need each other to help us see the bigger picture, to remember that even in the midst of the storms, God is still with us.
But there's something else I've been thinking about as we've been talking about this chapter.
What's that?
Well, we've discussed the miracles, the challenges, the lessons, But it's also important to consider the social dynamics at play.
Oh, I see where you're going with this. Like with Herod, right. His decision to execute John wasn't just about Herodias's anger.
Exactly. He was worried about what people would think, about looking bad in front of his guests.
It's a reminder that social pressure can be really powerful. Even kings can be influenced by what others think.
It makes you think about the choices we make, right? Are we doing things because we believe in them or because we're afraid of what other people will say?
It's something to be aware of for sure. But on the other hand, we also see the power of positive social dynamics.
Like the crowds who were so eager to be healed, to hear Jesus' teachings.
Exactly. There's something about being part of a group, a community, that can strengthen our faith and inspire us to do great things.
It's a reminder that we're not meant to live in isolation. We need each other. We can lift each other up, encourage each other, and help each other through the tough times.
Right. And that's something to really think about, isn't it? How do we use our influence, both individually and collectively, to make the world a better place?
That's a powerful question. So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've talked about the historical context, the emotional journeys, the symbolism, the social dynamics.
And yet it feels like we've only just scratched the surface.
There's always more to explore, isn't there?
Definitely. But before we wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with a question to ponder.
Oh, good idea.
If Matthew 14 were a chapter in your own life story, what title would you give it? What would be the defining moments, the lessons learned?
Wow, that's a great question. I think I'll be reflecting on that for a while.
Me too. And that's what we hope for, right? To inspire people to keep digging deeper, keep seeking truth, keep wrestling with these important questions.
Exactly. So keep those questions in mind, everyone, and join us for our next deep dive. Welcome back to our final segment on Matthew 14. I feel like we've been on quite a journey together, haven't we?
We really have, from a king's gruesome birthday bash to a miraculous feast to storms and walking on water.
Matthew certainly packs a lot into this chapter. So much to unpack, really. As we wrap things up, what are some of the key takeaways for you? It's really resonating.
You know, it's easy to get lost in the amazing stories, the miracles, the drama. But for me, it always comes back to faith.
Yeah, faith is the core of it all, isn't it?
Right, but it's not just about believing something blindly. It's about trusting God, even when things are tough, even when we don't understand what's happening.
Like those moments when we feel like we're sinking, like Peter in the storm. But then there's that moment of reaching out, asking for help,
And God being there, ready to pull us up.
Exactly. And I think that's something we can all relate to, right? Those moments of doubt, of fear, wondering if we're on the right path.
Oh, absolutely. We all go through that. It's part of being human. But Matthew 14 shows us, through all these different stories, that even when we doubt, even when we mess up, God is still there.
Always ready to offer grace and forgiveness. It's
Yeah.
really encouraging.
It is, and it reminds me that faith isn't just something we think about, it's something we do.
It's about action.
Right, like John the Baptist, speaking out against injustice, even though it put him in danger.
Where the disciples, following Jesus, even when they were afraid, even when they didn't understand what he was doing.
Exactly. And all those people who came to Jesus for healing, they weren't just sitting around waiting for a miracle. They went to him, they sought him out, they believed he could help them.
It's about taking that step, that leap of faith, even when we're not sure where it will lead.
And trusting that God will be there with us every step of the way.
So Matthew 14, it's full of drama, miracles, challenges.
Ups and downs, just like life itself.
Exactly. But ultimately, I think it's a story of hope.
Hope that even in the darkest moments, God is with us.
Hope that we can overcome our fears and doubts.
Hope that we can make a difference in the world.
Well said. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling pretty inspired right now.
Me too. And I hope our listeners are as well.
I hope so. So as we finish up this deep dive, I want to leave everyone with one final thought.
Yeah.
What if you were writing the story of your life? And Matthew 14 was one of the chapters.
Oh, I like that.
What would the title of that chapter be? What would be the defining moments, the biggest challenges, the greatest victories?
That's a powerful question. One we should all be asking ourselves, I think.
Definitely. Because our stories are still being written.
Yeah.
And even when we face storms, even when we doubt, even when we fall, God is still writing our stories.
And they can be stories of hope, of courage, of faith.
Beautifully said. So keep diving deep, everyone. Keep exploring. Keep seeking truth. And until next time, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Matthew 14.